In this video, we're going to talk about ensemble timing. This is perhaps one of the most complex issues that you will deal with in teaching your marching band. By utilizing good, consistent tempo, that is the phase one. That's your starting point for developing good ensemble timing. The second element of this is making sure that the drum major knows and is deeply familiar with the percussion book. They should attend percussion sectionals. They need to rehearse with the drumline and get used to knowing those parts. Typically, the percussion parts are going to have many more subdivisions than the wind parts. It's always, in my experience, easiest to make the parts that have less subdivisions be in time with the parts that have more subdivisions. Therefore, a drumline that's been in a good system of tempo control, consistency in that, with a drum major who knows the parts and knows how to link the brass book and the percussion book together, that's going to give you a lot of success in your ensemble timing. Now, there are several ways to make ensemble timing work. There's the version where the drumline's in charge of tempo. There's the version where the drum major is in charge of tempo. And there are several permutations of both of those in combination. One thing that I have learned is no situation is perfect all of the time. Another thing that I've learned is that it takes a significant amount of time to work these things out. One thing to consider for the front ensemble: their tempo source is always behind them. Maybe in 1% of the instances, they would actually watch the drum major for a downbeat if they're the only musical element attacking on the field. If there's any sound behind them, they must listen back and be in time with that. In that 1% instance where they watch the drum major to start the ballad, as soon as the winds come in behind them, they immediately shift their focus to being in time with those musical elements. So those are the basic concepts of ensemble timing. Now let's talk about a couple more specific scenarios. Let's say there's an extended period of time where there's silence on the field, or where one section hasn't played for a significant amount of time. That's when you might want to utilize duts. You have to be careful though, because let's say the snares are on the 20-yard line and the trumpets are on the 50. Well, if the snares are dutting too loud, they may misrepresent the tempo to the trumpets that are on the 50. You have to be really careful that when duts are utilized, they're only audible for the people that need them in that specific area. If you're rotating a block, maybe the person in the back of the form is the one dutting, and then everyone who can hear the duts in front of them comes in with confidence. Another thing that you can do is be creative with your arrangements. Sometimes in a phrase where there's no battery percussion involved and tempo starts to get a little bit on the wobbly side, you might just keep a light ostinato, maybe on a bass drum or a snare part at the edge of the drum, or maybe it's a solo part in the tenors or a solo snare drummer. You can be creative and incorporate a part that fits into the musicianship qualities of the music that you're playing. Another thing you can do, especially if it's a full ensemble attack, instead of it being a cold, loud fortissimo, maybe you bring the snares in softly, or two snares, and then add snares to that, and then add tenors, and then add basses. Things like that that define tempo and allow others around them to attack with confidence. A couple other considerations as far as ensemble timing. Let's talk about the front ensemble. There are many times when they're playing on gongs, concert bass drums, cymbals, that they simply can't hear anything behind them. As well, if the brass line is playing so loudly that they can't hear the battery behind them, that presents issues for the front ensemble to time with what's going on out on the field. So typically we utilize visual cues for them. Again, I'm going to mention they should not watch the drum major for tempo. If it's an emergency situation, they could do that, but they need to know that they're not going to perfectly be in time with what's behind them. The best thing would be to have the timpanist or perhaps the rack percussion player, someone who can turn their head to look at one of the other performers' feet. They can get timing from that. They give the head nod, or they conduct whatever is necessary to spread that tempo across the front ensemble. That's how we utilize tempo up front in situations where we can't listen. There are other instances where the drum line's playing a drum solo, they're in the front of the field, and then the brass line comes in behind them. Well, as was mentioned before, sound travels from back to front. Typically with the brass behind the percussion, when they come in, they're going to be late because they're going to be listening to the drum line. I have found that it's easier for the drum major to simply move to the front side of the tempo and then tell the brass to attack with the drum major, with what they see. We have one person making this decision for many. This seems to work in most instances, and it's a lot simpler. Again, you correct one person instead of correcting 40, 60, 80, or more people. When rehearsing your ensemble on the field, you want to make sure that when you start rehearsing a segment, that you start with the tempo coming from the field. Whether that's your amplified metronome or whether that's the center snare or the drum line tapping off. You want to put it into the normal performance mode. The only time that I'll have the drum major start the tempo with a vocal command is when we're at the very beginning of a chart, just as in a performance scenario. So if we're in the tune and the tenors are playing with fluffy mallets, I'll have them tap off so everybody hears the same types of things that they would normally hear in a performance situation. And lastly, it's very important to put people in the drill set and clean the ensemble timing that way. It's great to stand in an arc, play the music, and understand how it all fits together. But this is an activity of marching and playing. And we have to go set to set and figure out how the whole thing is going to piece together. Be careful when you're doing that, going set to set, that you don't create weird formulas or take things out of context. What you might want to do is rehearse a large chunk of music. Find out where the problems are within that, and then try to identify them. Going set to set, starting at arbitrary points in the music, you could be creating some ensemble problems by having one section rush or interpret differently the beat pulse. It's just not worth it, and it wastes a lot of time. Be careful. This is a tough nut to crack. It takes a long time to figure out how to make this stuff sound great outside, and it takes a lot of diligence. You'll figure it out. Be patient.